Welcome to this author interaction of the 2023 NLF Reading Challenge. My name is Karthika and I'm very excited to be here. I hope you are too. Before we begin the interaction, let me give you a brief introduction about the NLF Reading Challenge, followed by a few housekeeping rules for today's session. The NLF Reading Challenge is a 3-month-long reading event from July to October 2023. It runs between the competitive and the non-competitive tracks for students from grades 4 to 6. For the challenge, students read their way through a curated set of 30 books. They discuss their reading with their friends and their guide. They log their thoughts and they get to interact with the authors of some of these books online. The challenge will conclude with a quiz competition that will see the 3 best teams win gold, silver, and bronze engraved trophies, certificates of achievement, and a wonderful set of books. For today's event, please use the Q&A box to type out your questions or your responses to what's being discussed during the session. If you're a student, a teacher, or a school librarian, please mention the name of your school along with your question as well. In fact, if you already have your questions ready, please feel free to type them out. Today, we are privileged to have with us the award-winning author, Devika Rangachari. Dr. Devika Rangachari is an award-winning writer whose book Queen of Ice was on the White Raven list, won the Neve Book Award for Young Adults, and has been optioned to be made into a movie or TV series. Her other books for young readers include Queen of Earth, Queen of Fire, both of which have been on the Paragona list, Swami Vivekananda, A Man with a Mission, and Harshavardhana. She joins us today to speak about her children's book, The Train to Tanjore, which is on the reading list of the challenge. Set in the year 1942, around the time of India's Quit India movement, the book brings alive the story of a 12-year-old boy from a small, quiet town in Tamil Nadu and the big events that unfold. Welcome, Devika. We're very happy to have you with us today.
Hello, Karthika. Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here to talk about my book and so honored that The Train to Tanjore is part of your reading challenge this year.
We're so glad to have it. We've really enjoyed reading it. We're sure our readers have too. What we'll do this time for our readers, quick heads up, is that we'll go right into the questions and answers. So if you have your questions ready for Ms. Devika, please feel free to type them out. A handy tip is that we tend to pick the questions that are not easily Googleable, for which it'll be great to have the author answer the questions. So if you have questions like that, please feel free to type them out. So as we wait for student questions to come in, Devika, maybe we'll start with a question of our own. We know that you do a lot of research as a part of your writing, both you're writing for children and grown-ups. So when you were doing your research about Tanjore in the years leading up to independence, did you choose to write the novel and set it in this time of the Quit India movement because Tanjore witnessed momentous events happening at that time? In your research, were there other periods in the years leading up to independence where there were similar activities that happened? Why did you choose this time period?
So a slightly long answer to your question, Karthika. When Shiny, my publisher and editor, asked me to contribute to the Songs of Freedom series, my mind instantly went to some woman character I could write about, because as you know, I tend to write about women figures in history. So I was wondering who could I write about, and I was thinking of setting the story somewhere in the north, which I normally do for my stories, since I'm more familiar with the area, having done my research in the north. But then I started thinking of the story that I have grown up hearing of my father's boyhood in Tanjore, of what he did during the Quit India movement, what was the atmosphere, around him, what his family went through, and his own personal contribution to the movement. And I thought, okay, why not make a change this time? I'll have a boy as my hero, and loosely base the story on my father's growing up years there, and then weave the story around pretty much what he did and his experiences were. So, of course, there were momentous events happening, in other years preceding, succeeding, and so on. But I somehow felt that this would suit the story that I was thinking of. And also, since the protagonist was around 12, it would suit the audience that I was targeting as well, which is why I chose to set it in Tanjore in 1942.
Oh, that's interesting. Thank you for telling us, Devika.
Yeah.
Another question that comes up because the library plays such an important role in the book, and all of us are proponents of reading, and we all like to see library spaces. So there's a question that's come up for you from a student named Ananya Lapsiwala, and her question is connected with one of our questions as well. So we'll put that all together. Ananya Lapsiwala from Fountainhead School. She asks, were the types of newspapers in the library inspired by a library near you? That's one. And our question is more about how Thambi's character evolves over the course of the book. After his visits to the library, he seems to be thinking more, thinking deeper about the fact that the British newspapers seem to portray Indian history as if it didn't really exist before the British came. He also starts to wonder, where did Money, the character of Money, get the facts for his leaflet? So was this intentional for you to make Thambi more of a reader, more of a thinker, as he spends more time at the library? And of course, there's Ananya's question as well.
So, Ananya, to answer your question first, this is exactly the way newspapers were read when my father was 12 in Tanjore. At the time, they had this library, and the sheets of the newspaper were distributed among various racks. So you had to go from one rack to the other, reading the newspaper. Of course, you cannot imagine reading a newspaper like that these days. In fact, newspapers probably are read more in the online versions these days rather than the actual print versions. But even if you read the print version, you're obviously going to keep it in one place and go from one page to the other. But then you had to navigate the news in this way in those days. So, and I really wanted to have that as part of my book. And so that's why I give a lot of prominence to that. And as far as Thambi actually growing up in a lot of ways when he first encounters the library and the information that it has to offer, it was quite deliberate because as we all know, as readers and book lovers and writers, some of us, a library is a sort of a golden place where, everything is accessible to you that you would ever dream of in terms of knowledge, in terms of thinking, in terms of satisfying your curiosity, in terms of spurring your imagination. And I wanted Thambi to actually start questioning the larger world around him and his own interior world through his visits to the library. And this is also pretty much in tune with what my father used to tell me. He said that he used to do this. He used to go to the library and read. His father would listen to the BBC broadcasts, and they would meet in the evening and discuss the news. So put together the news in order to have a better picture of what was going on in the world, because news about what actually India was going through was hard to come by. It was basically the British point of view. So by putting this kind of information together, they were able to understand the world around them. And this does spur Thambi into thinking a lot about, okay, why is it that we don't read about, all these facts in our history classes? What is being concealed from us? Why is it being concealed? And if the British are actually committing so many atrocities against the Indian citizens, why is Money being able to access these facts and it not being there in the newspaper? If you remember, most of the information, the Quit India movement is one in the inside pages. So you have to literally hunt for the couple of lines that are there about the movement and so on, because there was quite a lot of censorship and suppression of news at that time. So yes, this period of Thambi is actually coming of age in a sense. In an intellectual sense, is very much tailored to happen to begin in the library. He's anyway a curious person, but this just sort of fuels his curiosity further.
Excellent. I think that's like an unofficial campaign, of course, for reading and libraries and newspapers.
Absolutely. Yes.
I also know that the readers have found the character of Sumit to be very interesting in The Train to Tanjore. And Sumit is Thambi's friend who moves to Tanjore, because his father fears that his home city of Calcutta will be bombed. And then eventually he moves to Kumbakonam. Is this character based on someone you knew, Devika? Because it seems very specific.
It is actually based on someone I know very well, but then I started off with that image in mind, but then he grew to be a combination of different characters, I mean, as I wrote him, I quite liked him as well, because he's quite an interesting, sort of slightly eccentric, outspoken character with a lot of sense of humor and so on. But it is that way with characters when you write, as you know, Karthika, since you're also a writer, it's like, you start off with an idea and then it goes into something else. And then you realize, oh, this is really interesting. Maybe I should develop this further. But in a little aside, actually, I didn't, when I started the story, I didn't really think of giving Thambi any friends. And then I thought I had to, because, I know my father had friends, and, a boy of his age or of his temperament, his personality would definitely have had some companions. And I actually, Gundu, his other friend, is actually based a lot on me, because I'm also extremely thin like him. And my friends keep complaining that I tend to always see, the what can go wrong in a situation, and keep, and I'm very cautious and I stop them from doing things. And I've always been that way. So, always like predicting doom and gloom. So actually, Gundu is me. And Sumit is just a lovely character who just came up very fortunately in the course of my writing.
Well, that's interesting. Must have been nice for you to travel with Sumit and Thambi on this journey as Gundu.
Yes. Yes.
So I think this is a good point for us to sort of break away from our Q&A and pose a question to the audience. So audience members, we know that The Train to Tanjore is a novel of historical fiction. And we know that there may be references to objects in the book that you've not heard of, that you're not very clear about. We would like you to tell us, if you could type in your Q&A box your responses. It'll be nice for us to see what are these references that you found as you read that you really didn't know what that was. That's one question. Another question for our audience members is that Thambi finds that when he's standing at Tanjore station, he finds a lot of soot-smeared passengers disembarking from trains, of getting off of trains. Why do you think there are soot-smeared passengers? And I know Devika will tell us, but it'll be good to hear and good to read what you have to say. So over to you, members of the audience. Oh, right. Okay. Abhinay Krishnadas says, because they were fueled by coal. Archana Mishra says, soot smeared because of all the smoke from the train engines. Interesting.
Absolutely. I remember when I was a kid growing up in Delhi, we would make this annual trip to the south during our summer holidays, and the steam engine, and you'd have this coal all over the place. Sometimes my mother would say, shut the window, because it would just the coal would just like fly past smoke, and it would be really difficult to breathe. And when we got off after like 1.5 to 2 days, our faces would be black. Literally, our hands would be black. So of course, these days, I don't think too many people can relate to that. Maybe you could go to the Railway Museum in Delhi if any of you ever go there or live there, and you can actually sit in one of these old ancient engines and see what it was like.
Yeah, I'm sure that we will get some audience members asking their parents soon enough on making a trip to the museum. We also have another comment from Ananya Lapsiwala, who says, I didn't know at first what Periyappa was. And then I'm guessing Ananya found out. Thank you for that, Ananya. And thank you, Abhinay and Archana, for your responses as well. So one more thing that I thought was interesting, Devika, and this is a question that ties in with Varsha Seshan, who's asked you. So let's lead with Varsha's question, and then I'll add mine. Or we'll add the NLF team's question. Varsha has said that while the British did call the place Tanjore, I wondered why you chose to spell it in that way rather than Tanjore, especially since the story deals with Indian children. What made you make that decision? And a related question that we have is that a lot of the references are very familiar to people who've spent time in Tamil Nadu. Like, for instance, Thambi refers to the elders in who are his father's acquaintances, like Venkatesan Mama and Srinivasan Mama. And Mama is the word for uncle in Tamil. There's also, he's told off for wanting to smell onions and garlic from the sambar at New Madras Hotel. And we know that these are references that are familiar for particular groups we've had friends like this, if you've grown up in Tamil Nadu. But it may have been, have you had any feedback about what it was like for readers who've not lived in Tamil Nadu, who've not experienced the culture, and how they've been able to respond to the story?
Okay, so to answer the first part and Varsha's question, there was a lot of discussion on the title, what to keep as the name. Would it be Tanjavur, which actually not too many people understand or relate to. I think Tanjore is a more easily accessible word, for better or for worse. People in our family call it Tanjay, which is completely different. So you won't even understand what is the place that's being referred to. And then we thought that since it was a British setting and, the whole, the aspect of the colonial rule, that they did change the names. A lot of familiar names were made into now familiar names, but then not so familiar names, and by corrupting the pronunciation and so on. And they had made Tanjore into Tanjore. So it was deliberate to show that it's set in this context, which is why they trained to Tanjore. The other question of, as I think Ananya said, was that Ananya who said Peripa? She didn't know that
That's
it was
right. Ananya said that.
So the thing is that I've always felt, and this is true of me as a very young reader as well. When I first started out to read, I would always get irritated if there were explanatory notes next to words explaining, what the word meant. If I was reading something which was in a different cultural context or different world context or something. So I think that the words that are unfamiliar should make sense when you read it in that context. And there are several clues, as for example, the word Peripa, there's several clues that you get. The word Anna, which is actually older brother, which is also, you can make out, that this is the word for older brother in Tamil and so on. So you can make out from the context of, of the story and so on. So I think, and I have received very good feedback from friends, from young readers who have no acquaintance with the language, or in fact with much of the South, who said that they understood it completely. So I think I prefer reading and writing stories this way, like just putting in words and then having the reader just figure them out in their own way. So I hope it doesn't, I don't think any reader is going to look through this book and say I can't understand anything. It's very unlikely that would happen, because of a few typical Tamil words used.
Interesting. Thank you for that, Devika. We actually have a student from grade 5 from NHPS Bangalore, Priyanka K, who seems to have divined that the character of Thambi. Actually, her question's a little different. She says, do you like to read like Thambi? Is that why you made Thambi's character more like a reader?
Definitely, I always have been and still am a voracious reader like Thambi. And since I modeled Thambi on my father is also a voracious reader who actually got me started, in the world of books. So yes, of course, there's this is a very recognizable pattern. Yeah, this is the way I would like to read. Of course, not necessarily going from rack to rack trying to gather information, but yes, to read and to know about the world and what is happening is definitely one of my passions. So yes.
Thanks. I'm sure Priyanka is really satisfied with that answer. So we have a bunch of questions that have come in, Devika, for you about the character of Periyappa. Srinidhi Iyer says, why was Thambi's uncle unconvinced about his life and his upcoming career? Adrika Sarkar says, from your personal experience, was there anyone like Periyappa whom you've encountered? And there is also Meera Maroj from Primrose School, Puducherry, who says, why was Thambi's uncle so hard on him? He helped his younger brother when he was young, and then why did he become so hard-hearted?
So I think I'll answer the second one first and then club 1 and 3 together. The second one is I have met many strange people, in the course of my life, but never anybody as malevolent as this Peripa figure. But actually, such a person did exist. He was my father's uncle, and he behaved in exactly this way. So as I said, the story is a blend of fact and fiction. A lot of it is fiction, but some of it, the core is fact. So this is what happened to my father, that he did have this uncle who, completely, did not believe that or did not want this boy to actually fulfill his dreams. Because you see, it's also that was a worldview at the time. They couldn't think of anything higher than a particular rank, because the kind of money that the limited money that they had at their disposal, for them, all that was accessible was, say, a lower division clerk. You can't go above that. Like if you do manage to rise higher, it can't be very much higher. So something like a degree was completely beyond their even thinking at that time, because it was something that required a lot of work, a lot of money, because you'd have to actually move out of Tanjore, go to Chennai, Madras, and study there in some engineering college, which should involve staying in a hostel, all that kind of thing. So practicalities dictated that people should not be encouraged to dream beyond reason, that they should be rooted in reality. And since this Peripa felt that he had the ruling hand over this family, since he had brought up his brother, he felt that he needed to tell them, or just lay down the law and say that, no, this is what I have decided is your future, so therefore you jolly well go for this future. You can't. And it's also a challenge to his authority that, I don't want to do what you want me to do. I want to do what I want to do. So it's how dare you challenge me? I know what's best for you. That kind of attitude. So yeah, I hope I've answered the three questions.
I'm sure all the Periappa curious minds are satisfied with that answer.
Yes.
We have two writing questions that have come for you, Devika, from Nuha Adil from Pep School V2 and Kavya Vikram from Akia JPN. So Nuha asks, did you face any big challenge while writing Train to Tanjore? And Kavya asks, what was the hardest part of writing the book? Was it the research, the actual writing, or the corrections that you got back from your editor?
Okay. The first question again, Nuha's question was, sorry, could you repeat that?
Nuha's question was, did you face any challenges? And Kavya's question sort of expands on that, saying, what was the hardest part of writing the book?
I didn't really face any challenges in writing this book, apart from the usual. I had to write this very fast because I was leaving India to move to Doha, so I didn't have much time in between packing and so on. So I had to meet this deadline. So I actually wrote this very fast. So there weren't that many challenges in that sense, the actual writing sense. But what was the hardest part? I think for me, I won't say hard part, but the slightly different part while writing this book for me was that I was actually interacting with a live source of information. Normally, when I write my historical fiction, I'm dealing with, evidence or sources that I have uncovered in the course of my research. So things like inscriptions, coins, and so on about people who have died a long time ago, and I'm trying to bring them to life and so on. But here, I just had to keep calling up my father and saying, okay, can you remember what it was like, when you say, this movie experience that I described in the Rajaram Electric Theatre is exactly the way he describes it. This is the way. And the movie was also Dashavatam. He remembers this movie. I mean, so this is what happened. So it was so interesting to ask him, okay, so where did you sit? How did, what are the people around you doing? What is the, audience reaction and things like that. So, and just getting him to draw maps for me that, okay, where would Nida Mangalam lie on the route between Manargudi and Tanjore, and, that kind of research. So for me, it was a very different kind of approach. Normally, I'm sitting in libraries or looking through books and so on. Here, I'm just calling up my father and saying, okay, today I need to ask you all these questions. So that's really interesting. And to have I think the hardest part for me was when I gave him the book to read after I had written it. So, to just, because I was very nervous about his reaction. Was I able to do justice to Tanjore of those times? Have I recreated the entire atmosphere properly and so on? And he was very happy about it. So that was my real, sort of challenge that I faced after I wrote it, not while I was writing it.
Oh, yeah. Excellent. Yeah. I know in the Rajaram Electric Theatre bit, there's the bit about the Petromax lamps. There's the bit about the song book, which cost half an anna. Just things that we have it's just, we don't even have any of those things today, but it's so nice nice to see it and read it and imagine it.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
We have Adrika Sarkar, who has a question for you, Devika, about a parallel where she feels like she sees that your story is very similar to Malgudi Days. And she said, can you please share if you drew any inspiration from Malgudi Days?
That's really interesting that you should say that, because one of my good friends, Deepa Agarwal, who's also a very well-acclaimed writer, she's a friend. She said, after reading it, she said, it reminds me of, Swami and Friends, Malgudi Days. So, so for me, no, I read Malgudi Days a very long time ago. I would love to read it again, of course, when I have the time. At my reading piles are just like, they're just increasing, they're not diminishing. But I would love to take that in a very complimentary sense and say, if there's the slightest parallel with R.K. Narayan, I would be over the moon with happiness, because he's such a magnificent writer. So, I'm glad that, there is a slight similarity, at least.
Excellent. We also have a question, Devika, from Nila, Tusha, and Amaya. and from Sanshray Luhana from the Sri Ram School, Vasant Vihar. So Niladusha and Amaya say, you have shown very well that children fail to observe certain societal differences and inequalities when they're young. Later, it comes as a surprise to them. Sometimes it even empowers them. In this book, it is the perspective of Indians by the British. What other issues will you be using in your next novel and why? And a related question to that from Sanshray is, are we expecting a sequel?
Are we expecting a sequel? For this, you'll have to ask Shani Basu, my publisher, whether she is intending to do, sequels to all the books that are there in the Songs of Freedom series. That I hope all of you, at least most of you, have read, because the other books are also really great. What issues am I going to take up? Well, as I said, this book is a little different from my usual kind of writing. I don't know if you're familiar with my other writing, the three of you, but normally I write about women in history, and that is also an issue that I take up, that when you read your history textbooks, women are usually not really visible, because the writing of history is male-centered. So you hear a lot about a lot of men, but you hear very little about a few women. So my writing is usually about very remarkable women in history who've been removed from the larger historical story, and to put them back into the into history where they belong, and to tell their stories in a way that's interesting, that tells you how wonderful they were and what their contribution was to the past. So that is an issue that I will definitely be exploring even more. But if I were to write a sequel to The Train to Tanjore, I would be, of course, talking about a lot of issues in society that of course, my father had to face in the course of his studies, and generally, which talks about a lot of issues that are still there in the South today, not just the South, in a lot of the country, but how we perceive people who are different from us in some way or the other, in social status, in economic status, and people from different religions, how do they interact, issues like that. So yes, I would be doing that.
Excellent. And we are all looking forward to seeing those books when they come out. So Devika, I think we're at our 1 minute to go to 6 p.m. So this half hour is just whisked by. Thank you so much for doing this with us today. It's been an absolute pleasure.
I've loved interacting with you, Karthika, and answering all these wonderful questions. I wish I could answer a lot more, but I know time constraints. And thank you so much for reading this book and liking this book and being so involved in it that you understand what I was trying to portray through the story of Thambi. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Devika. It was our pleasure. We'll see you around.
Yeah.